A School of Her Own by Arleta Richardson. Chapter 5. School Opens. The children were grouped around the door when I opened it, and before I could even ring the bell, they were rushing past me and into the room. The little ones were pushed inside, lunch pails clanged, and voices reverberated from wall to wall. I walked to the front and stood by my desk until everyone was seated. Since I had not yet said anything, they were soon eyeing me curiously. When it was quiet, I did say something. "Good morning, boys and girls. My name is Miss O'Dell. You have come to school to learn something, and we'll begin right now. Stand, please." The children glanced at each other. Then, one by one, they stood by the desks. "Now, turn around and march back out the door to the schoolyard." Uncertainly, they began to move. Some of the girls giggled nervously, and the boys shoved each other. I followed them outside and stood on the lower step of the porch. "The girls will line up on the right side from smallest to the largest, the boys on the left in the same order." In my mind, I could hear Sarah Jane saying, "You didn't lose any time separating the sheep from the goats." And I almost laughed. This was not the occasion, however, to indulge in humor. When two fairly straight lines faced me, I introduced these children to a new way of doing things. "This is your first lesson this year," I told them. "We do not enter our classroom like a herd of pigs headed for the trough. When I ring the bell, you will line up as you are now. When I say good morning to you, you will have the courtesy to answer me. Good morning, boys and girls." "Good morning, Miss O'Dell," they chorused. "You will please find a desk in the row corresponding to your grade when we enter the room." The little ones in the front of me looked bewildered, and I realized that they probably hadn't the faintest idea what I was talking about. I smiled at them and said, "The beginners will be in the first row at the front of the room. Shall we go in now?" We all filed back to our desks, still in silence. It was obvious that they were not sure what to think of this new teacher. I counted to be sure I had my full quota that first day. 15. Alice had been right, and so had I when I surmised that some of my students would be bigger than I was. 1/4 of the class was taller, including the 7th grade girl. "You will not be required to walk around in silence like a troop of soldiers," I said. "I simply want you to know that we will do things decently and in order as the Bible instructs us. Now, starting with the 7th grade, will you stand and tell me your names?" One by one I heard the names that, before the year was over, would be as familiar to me as my own. Elsie, Abe, George, Carrie, Prudence. The only little boy in the beginner class could not be persuaded to lift his head, let alone his body, from his desk when it was his turn. "He's my brother Toby," 7th grader George Eliot informed me. "He's awful bashful." I stooped down in front of Toby's desk. "Toby Eliot? Say, is it your father who takes care of our school?" The buried head nodded. "Well, I'm glad you're here. Will you do something for me?" One eye peered up over the folded arms. "Will you tell your father when you get home how much we appreciate the nice job he did to make our room look so neat?" The other eye looked out and regarded me seriously. Toby's head came up and he answered loudly, "Yes, ma'am." There were 2 beginners left, the twins. I could see at once that it would not be easy to tell them apart by any physical characteristic. I would have to watch for some significant mannerisms to distinguish them. The rest of the morning was devoted to handing out books, appointing monitors, and assigning lessons. "I don't believe those Abbott twins can tell each other apart," I said to Mrs. Williams that evening. "They change seats, and either one may answer a question no matter which one is asked. I don't dare say anything to one without looking at both." By Friday, we were settled into a routine of sorts. I had time to pay attention to individual children, and they were beginning to behave in typical ways. Teddy Sawyer came up from recess with an announcement. "Miss O'Dell, there ain't no dipper in the water bucket." "There isn't any dipper in the water bucket," I corrected him automatically. "Oh, I thought you didn't know." Teddy sat down. "I didn't know until you told me," I said. Can anyone tell us what happened to the dipper?
I might be able to find it, Abe Lawton spoke up from the back row. You want I should try? He was grinning from ear to ear, and I was aware that he not only might be able to find it, but had probably put it wherever it was.
Very well, Abe. You may go.
He rose cheerfully and slouched out the door. I was sure we would not be seeing him for several minutes, as long as he dared to prolong his mission. The upper grades were working on a written assignment, and I wanted to spend some time with the middlers on arithmetic. I would need help with the beginners. The 7th graders were busy, so I scanned the 6th grade row. Prudence Edwards looked up at me.
Prudence, if you've finished your writing, I'd appreciate it if you could help the beginners with letters and numbers.
Prudence smiled and closed her book. She soon had the 4 little ones surrounding her, reciting the alphabet rhymes. I became aware that the twins were giving her a problem, too. Josie began.
A is for apple, so round and so red. B is for baby in his little bed. C is for cat, so fluffy and light. D is for dog who barks in the night, Rosie supplied.
Don't help her, Rosie, Prudence said. She can recite by herself. The afternoon droned to a close, and it was soon time to dismiss the children. I watched them scatter in different directions and then turned to go back to my desk. A rustling sound at the side of the building prompted me to see who had not left with the others. It was Abe Lawton. He had not heard me approach, and I watched a moment to see what he was doing. He appeared to be trying to open a window, using a stick as a lever.
Abe, did you forget something?
Startled, he faced me, his eyes wide with fear. No, he muttered. Didn't forget nothing.
Then what are you doing?
Nothing, just fooling around.
I don't think the schoolhouse is a good place to fool around, I said. Don't you have chores to do at home?
Yes'm, he answered sullenly. I'm going now. As he threw down the stick and started away, the sleeve of his shirt caught on the window ledge. There was a loud rip as the seam gave way, and Abe looked at the gap in dismay. I'll get it now, he said. Ma'll thrash me if Pa don't get to me first.
It's not that bad, Abe, I said. Come on, I've got some thread in my desk. I can stitch it for you in just a minute.
Reluctantly, Abe followed me back into the room, holding the shirt sleeve in place.
Sit down. This won't take long.
He took his hand away, and I gasped as the cloth fell to reveal ugly, dark bruises on his arm and shoulder.
Oh, Abe, have you been fighting?
He shook his head.
Then where did you get these horrible marks?
His head was down, and I thought he was not going to answer me. Pa whooped me.
He whooped you more than once to do that much damage,
I thought to myself. I was not used to a father who manhandled his sons. I didn't know what to say.
Does your ma know about these bruises?
She knows. As quickly as I could, I sewed the sleeve together.
All right, Abe, you hurry on home and I'll see you Monday.
He left swiftly, and I sat down to think. What, if anything, should I do? I was aware that parents considered children their property, and that it would probably not be wise to question their care of them. But could I stand by silently when I knew that a boy was being physically abused?
There's nothing Abe could have done to deserve that harsh a beating,
I thought indignantly. Perhaps I should speak with Len about it. He knew the family and could advise me. I cleared my desk, gathered up my papers and books to take home, and glanced around the room. A copybook lay on the floor near the back, and on my way out I picked it up. As I opened it to find where it belonged, my eye fell on a sentence at the bottom of the page.
Elizabeth says Miss O has her cap set for Leonard Williams.
Julianne Lawton was the name on it, and my face felt hot as I shoved the book onto her desk. I left as quickly as I could, locking the door behind me. Hurrying down the road toward the Williams house, I was thankful that I would be heading toward my own dear home in just a short while. I was looking forward eagerly to the 2 days at home, and I was sure that would never be enough time to tell Sarah Jane about my week and to hear about hers. As I walked, I thought about the scribbled comment. Set my cap indeed.
Mr. Lawton whipped the wrong child,
I thought angrily, and then immediately felt remorse. No child deserved that kind of treatment, not even one who spread horrid tales. My face grew warm again, and I slowed my steps. I could not confide in Len now. I must be careful to avoid him as much as possible. I certainly would not give anyone in this community an opportunity to spread stories. Len and Alice were in the kitchen when I arrived. I had hoped to have my things together and be gone before he came in from his work. "Would you ladies like to see what Pa and I brought home this afternoon?" Len asked us. "It's out in the barn."
"Oh, yes."
Alice dropped the sewing she was doing on the table.
"What is it?"
I couldn't very well refuse without being impolite, so I put my books down and followed after them. "Buffer is chained," Len told me. "He won't get in our way." He didn't appear to be laughing at me, but I couldn't be sure. We entered the barn and Alice ran to a stall in the back.
"A roan horse!" she exclaimed. "Len, is he yours? What is his name?"
"He doesn't have one yet," Len replied. "I thought maybe Miss O'Dell would help us name him." He looked at me questioningly.
"Oh, he's beautiful!"
I stroked the horse's chestnut-colored coat, which was thickly peppered with gray. He stamped impatiently. It was obvious that this was no workhorse. Len put a bridle on him and led him outside. "Won't he look great pulling the buggy?" he exclaimed boyishly.
"Indeed he will,"
I said.
"I've never seen a more handsome horse. He needs a special name."
"That is why I thought you should suggest something," Len said.
"I'll think about it," I replied. "I'm sure we can come up with a name."
As Len led the horse back into the barn, I thought of Nellie, the faithful old puller of buggies that we had loved for so many years. I didn't remember who had named her, but it was probably my oldest brother Reuben. He had a special empathy with all our animals. I had only a few minutes before it was time to go home, so I hurried to gather what I needed to take with me. As I looked out my window toward the school, I realized that I loved my job. It had been a good week in spite of today's misfortunes, and whatever lay ahead, I could handle, with the help of the Lord.
"Mabel, your friends are here,"
Alice called up the stairs. I rushed down and hugged Sarah Jane. "I see you haven't aged a great deal since I left you," she said. "Were you a great success?"
"It's too soon to tell," I replied. "At least they haven't told me not to come back. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce you to my family while I'm here. Mr. and Mrs. Williams, their niece Alice, and Leonard Williams."
I glanced at Sarah Jane sharply. A look of surprise crossed her face and her eyes lit up mischievously. But all she said was, "How do you do?" "So that's the hired man?" she snorted as we drove out the gate. "Has he said anything about your grand entrance?"
"Of course not," I answered primly. "And it's time you forgot about it too."
"I may not talk about it, but it will be a long time before I can forget it," she replied. "Now, tell me all about your week." We chatted nonstop all the way home, causing Mr. Clark to declare that his ears were sore by the time he let me off at our porch. Sarah Jane promised to come back after supper, and I ran up the steps to greet Ma. It was so good to be home. We had a nice visit while we ate. When we were doing the dishes, I told Ma about the new horse.
"Regal,"
I said.
"That's what he should be called." "Is it your place to name him?"
Ma inquired.
"Well, yes, Len said that I could."
My cheeks got a little warm.
"Of course, I'll just suggest it. It would be his choice, really." "I'm glad you've had a successful beginning, Mabel. Let's go out and sit with Pa until Sarah Jane gets here, shall we? I want to hear about her school, too."
I sat down on the steps, took a deep breath, and leaned against the post. There were so many new things to think about. End of Chapter 5.